Hello and welcome to another tutorial. So this time we are going to be taking a look at how we can get weather information for the current location where our player is. And as part of this, we actually get information more than just the weather. We'll get also information like time zone. There generally can get sort of city and country information as well. So there's a bunch of bits of info that we'll actually be able to get for this. So let's get stuck in. So getting the information, it's pretty straightforward for a lot of it. And there's going to be a couple of things that I'll show you that'll make it a little bit easier. And there's also a couple of important things to be aware of from a security point of view with this stuff. That's going to be something we'll get into as well. So one of the things we need is, because to get a lot of this information, we need to do queries to websites, and we can get the information back in a variety of formats. JSON is one of the most common ones, but the built-in stuff that's there in Unity for working with JSON isn't really going to sort of work for what we need often. But there is a version of the Newtonsoft JSON that we can actually add via Package Manager. So with Package Manager up, I can go here to the plus and I can go add package by name. And so if I know the name of the package, then I can just manually put that in here, which in this case, the one I'm after is com.unity.newtonsoft-json. So this will manually add that package in. So if you see something mentioning a package and it's not listed there, sort of in the list, you can actually just add it directly via this method. And then it will think about it a little bit, and we'll see that it's saying that it's installing it, and then it'll bring that into the project. So that's going to give us access to a much more capable JSON parser and something that's kept sort of up to date with Unity, which is good. So, okay, that's a good starting point. So I'm going to rename our scene to main level, and just going to shrink everything down. So we're going to set up our script. It's all going to be in a single script. And this is going to be called get current weather info. Create that because I made a typo. Let's fix up the naming of that. And we'll fix up the class name. So this is going to do a bunch of requests now to actually get the weather info. There is a really handy setup site called Open Weather. So Open Weather Map, you can get the information, get quite detailed weather data, and they do have a free plan that's pretty good setup. But to do that, we need our latitude and longitude. So we need to go through something else to get our latitude and longitude. And we can actually, from the public IP address, we can get a latitude and longitude. So first thing we need to do is get the public IP address. Then once we've got the public IP address, we can then turn that into a latitude and longitude, and then we can get the weather information for that. So it's a few bits of steps we need to run through for this. This is also something where if you are you're having to transmit the people's public IP address, that's something that you probably want to look at disclosing to players and give people the opportunity to opt out of that, because that might be something that people are not happy with having. So make sure you're giving people the choice there for that. So we're going to just have a get weather info that I'll attach this onto. So our first step is getting that IP address. So we need to do a bunch of web requests for this. So I'm going to bring in using Unity Engine networking. That will give me access to the actual web request system that I'm going to be using. And then because the web requests, they're asynchronous, they run in the background, this is where I'm going to make a lot of use of coroutines. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a coroutine that what it does is get weather, and we'll call this stage 1, or maybe phase 1, public IP. So what it's going to do is it's going to set up a request to get that. Now, there are different services that will give you back your IP address. I've chosen one that's so recommended that it gives it back in just the cleanest possible format, and that the only response you get is that info. So what I'm going to do, and so with Unity's web requests, I generally will always wrap them in a using. That just ensures everything gets properly cleaned up. I have run into issues previously where if they're not wrapped in a using, then they don't get properly cleaned up memory-wise, which is not good. So just wrapping them in a using works out well there. So I'm just going to call this request. So we do a Unity web request dot get, and then I'm going to set these up as strings. So I'm going to have a const string URL get public IP, which is going to be HTTPS API, and we have ipfi.org. So I can just do a get with that. So attempt to retrieve our public IP address. So that, I want to set the timeout for it. So this should be something that you could either go with the defaults or you can adjust it. It's something where you need to take into account that is the longest possible time that this might take. So that introduces delays into your project potentially. So I'm going to set it to 1. So the time is in seconds. Then I can do a yield return request send web request. And at the end of this, I'll just do a yield return null. So we've sent the request. Now we need to check if there was a failure. So did the request fail? So the way we can check that is we can see, okay, well, request result, is that equal to Unity web request? Is it something like a connection error? So we can check the different types of errors. So what I can also do is just check, okay, well, did we succeed? So if it succeeded, we'll do one thing. Otherwise, we're going to log out. Failed to get public IP. And we can output the text that we get back, because that will sometimes include the reason. So we can go for the request download handler.text. So that might contain a reason. Won't always, depends on the reason why we got blocked. One of the things to be mindful of when you're doing things like this is make sure that you have stuff in there so it's not going to constantly try and do this at a really high rate. It's very common that with any of these services, they will have rate limits there. And if you exceed those rate limits, then you'll often encounter a block for a chunk of time. Might be an hour, might be 24 hours. If you exceed those blocks to an even higher level, some of them will actually make it a permanent blocking, and you need to contact them and potentially actually sign up for premium plans to remove it. So we just want to be very mindful when things do fail with stuff like this. So I'm going to put this up here. And what I'm also going to do is I want to keep track of our state. So our phase essentially. So these will be an enum. We'll have not started. We'll have get public IP. Then the next stage will be get geographic data. And we have get weather data. We also have failed and succeeded. So I'm going to set up this So I'll make that public because that would be useful for other things to be able to see. And we'll set that to not started. Then here, I'll start the coroutine for that one. Because the very first thing it will do is it will set the phase to getting the public IP. Now, if it failed, I want to set that to that, just so we can be keeping track of the status. Otherwise, we know that we've gotten the public IP address, which is great. So that's something where I will set up a string here. We'll have a protected, actually it can just be string public IP. And this is just public IP, ends up being, we take our request, download handler, text, and shouldn't really need to trim it, but just to be sure, that's what I'm going to do. So, okay, we've handled whether it succeeded or failed. Now again, I am not going to run this and debug out what the public IP address is. I will debug log out that it finished, but I won't log out the actual IP address. Again, this is something where there is a level of sort of security in that you do want to actually take and maintain with this. And one of the big things there is you don't want to just be putting your public IP address visible for folks. So that's good. It finished. Now we can move on to the next stage. Okay, so first stage was getting the public IP. Now we're going to get the geographic information. So much like the other one, so all these functions will actually be very similar. We'll have get weather, phase 2, geographic information. So this is where we're going to turn that public IP address into our actual latitude and longitude information. So I'm going to put a start coroutine here, get weather, like that. Now this is going to be a very similar approach. So first thing it's going to do is set the phase to get geographic data. Now, for getting this information, I'm going to be using a site called geoplugin.net. Now, there are rate limits. So, as I was saying before, there are rate limits that exist with this. Its free plan has pretty decent rate limits, but it is something that it is possible to hit. So we do want to make sure we are not spamming it. This is one of the sites where if you pass one threshold, you get blocked for an hour. If you pass another threshold, you actually get blocked in the firewall, and that's one that you have to contact them to actually have that removed. So it's great that they do provide a free tier. It's a really good setup, really good site. Highly recommend it, but please do make sure when you are doing testing of this, be very cautious about setting things up so you can't go and spam it. It's a reason why I'm setting this up being kicked off in start and not doing stuff in update. And this is actually something that I would never want to do this in update. This is something where I would do it once and then the user could potentially request it again, or maybe after a long delay could run it again. It is not something that I would do as a regular sort of rapid rate because that's going to spam it. And as I said, they provide a free plan for it, which is just fantastic. So it has a URL as well. So we'll get that put in here. So URL, get geographic data. So this one, we have geoplugin.net. We indicate the format that we're requesting it back in, which is JSON, and we provide an IP address. So this is going to be a similar setup, and I'm actually going to grab this. So this will be attempt to retrieve the geographic data. So this is going to use URL, get geographic data, plus we add in our public IP address. So if it succeeded, Well, what we do is a little bit different, because what we're getting back is actually quite a complex set of data. It's a JSON encoded class. So we need to actually convert what we get back to that class. Now, this is something where what I am going to do is I've actually, based upon the response that comes back, I have actually already built up this class so that we don't need to. So this is something that I'm going to put in here, and I put it inside this get current weather info class. It's not something other things need. So I'm going to leave it like that. So I can't use JSON property yet. That's because I need to add in using Newtonsoft JSON. So this is the class that we will get back, and the Newtonsoft JSON plugin that we added in is going to make it really easy to convert this data. So what I will be able to then have is geo plugin response, geographic data. And how I use this is I would say geo plugin response. So then I need to convert it. And so I can say, okay, well, we want to use JSON convert deserialize object, and we're deserializing, so this is actually supposed to be geographic data. So this is geo plugin response, and we give it the request download handler dot text. And then we can log stuff out from this. So we can make sure that it's worked. Again, I'm not going to log out or show the entirety of it because it has stuff there like IP address and latitude and longitude. There's a lot of extra information in it. But I will log out something like, say, the time zone, just so we can see that it's working. So it gives a lot of info. You get quite a large amount of information back, which is fantastic. So it's going to run and gets back correctly that I am in Brisbane. So that's good. We've got the geographic data. So now the next stage is we need to get the weather information. So that's the final phase. So we'll have then here a start coroutine, get weather, phase 3, weather information. So exactly the same as what we were doing with the others. Now this one is going to follow largely a similar pattern. So to the extent where I can just duplicate this setup, because it is going to be almost identical. We're getting the weather data, and I'll rename that so it's spelt correctly. The difference is going to be is that when we succeeded here, we go to the succeeded phase. Now the other thing is the URL here is a little bit more complex. So when we're working with the open weather map, which here is the particular site for it, and I'll put a link to this in the description below. So this is one that you do need to register for. So this is one that gives you something called an API key, and that API key is how you access the site. So without that, you can't actually access it. Now its free plan has got pretty generous limits. Its free plan is quite good in that regard, but the key thing is you do need to, it will have limits there, so do be aware of those. Again, we want to make sure we're not spamming stuff. And again, there is stuff like that API key. So I'm going to set this up and I'm going to put the API key in a way where it won't be actually there in the repo, and it's not something I'm going to show on screen. Your API key, you want to make sure that never goes in a public repo or shown anywhere publicly, because that is all someone needs to access it as if they were you. So do make sure you're cautious with that. That also means that the version of this that is going to be up on the repo without you setting up your own API key it is not going to actually work. So that's something just to be aware of. So I'm going to set up the URL first, get weather data, and so that we pass in openweathermap.org. Again, these are URLs that can potentially change, so that's something to be mindful of. So I am also going to set up here a const string openweather API key. I'm going to leave empty for now, just so I can format the URL down here. Because the weather URL, we need a URL for the get of the weather data. Then we provide latitude information. We need to provide longitude information. And we need to provide our API key. So we need to also then have app ID equals, and our API key will go there. So this ends up being a bit of a convoluted URL to put together. So I'm actually going to construct it, because we didn't include the question mark at the start. So I'm actually going to build it like this. So weather URL plus equals. Add in the latitude. I'll do the same thing here, plus equals that. And then finally, which the longitude, it's actually lon, not long. And then weather URL plus equals like that. So this is our open weather API key. This is our geographic data and our latitude. Then we have our geographic data and our longitude. So this becomes a weather URL. Now that's going to give us back a whole bunch of data, which again, we're going to need to convert into classes. But first, what I'm going to also do is just put in a check. So just because the version that's uploaded to the repo won't have this in it. So f null or empty, or yeah, null or empty works. For the open weather API key, then debug log error, no API key set for, and then I'll just put in the specific address for it, just so we've got it clear that that's not there, and it will just not even try and start the chain of things, just so we've got that safety check. So I am going to put in my API key for testing purposes, but to make sure that I can hide it, I'll put it in a region, and then through the magic of editing, put it in and then hide the fact that the key's in there so that the key is not being shown. Again, really want to emphasize, make sure you're following sort of good security practices. Don't put API keys somewhere public where they're easily able to be found. That's something that people can then easily go and use and put requests through as if they were you. Okay, so I've added in the API key. Now we're ready to get the data back. Now the open weather data, it gives us back a lot. Like, it is phenomenally good, the level of detail we get back from this. And it's really quite impressive. This is an example of basically the response we get back. There's temperature, there's wind, there's cloud, visibility, rain, snow, lots of information. It's even super detailed when we get down to weather conditions. It'll give you back information like different types of level of thunderstorms. You get different icons that you can actually get back, so you can actually request an image. So it has the different codes, things like that here. It's excellent, the sort of setup there. So again, there are a lot of classes for this, and what I have done is I have set up all of these, and I will put these just directly into the project, so you'll have access to those, just to make it a little bit less of a hassle to work with. So we've got all of the open weather responses. As you can see, there's a lot. I've put in stuff where I've taken their internal names, because they need to often have shorter internal names for things, and I've expanded those out so they're a bit more of a verbose description. Then what we have is our open weather response, weather data. So we can retrieve that. It's almost identical. Although it's quite a complex set of data, it's nested. It's able to give back some stuff that has arrays of classes. We actually can just pass the whole lot by doing that. It's really great in that regard. Then in terms of what I can do with this, well, I can go and check. Well, if phase is succeeded and we have not shown weather info, then what I can do is have here shown weather info is false. Set this to true, and then what I can do is let's log out a bunch of the stuff. So we can log out debug log. So we can log out. Let's log out a bunch of things here. So we'll go for, let's say, weather info 4, and then we can grab weather data. And there's a lot of things here, so we can put in there city name. And then I can loop through conditions in weather data dot weather conditions, and I can log out. So we have with that, there's stuff, so we can go, we'll actually call that condition. So we can go condition group, and we can put in a bit more info because there's the condition dot description. It also gives out icons, things like that. So that will give the weather conditions. We could also log out saying temperature and weather data. And the key info has a lot of stuff. So you have min and max temperatures. You have the temperature that it currently is, the temperature that it feels like. So we can go temperature. I could also log out humidity and pressure. That. And I will actually also set a breakpoint here so we can see the range of information that we do get available to us with this. So I'm going to run this, and then we'll see what information we get. It's going to take it a little bit. So you can see, logged out a bunch of stuff there. I forgot to attach the debugger, but I can actually just put a breakpoint here because it's still running. And we can take a look at that weather data. So if I go to Quick Watch, we can see we've got city information. Now, some of these ones will be filled in. So I can see like the cloudiness it's saying is 75, and that's as a percentage, which, yeah, looks reasonably cloudy outside at the moment. we can see in terms of the key info, so temperatures, these might look alarmingly high. Those temperatures are, by default, it uses standard units, so those are in Kelvin. So if we subtracted 273.15, is I believe the conversion, it's around that, then that would say, you know, the temperature is more like 26 degrees, which looks about right. Not all of the fields, again, will be populated, so pressure and humidity we have, but some of these ones won't be present. Unsurprisingly, rain and snow. It's a clear day. It's never snowed, as far as I'm aware, in Brisbane, but who knows. But that information is able to be there. Visibility, so that's the visibility distance in meters. There is wind information, so you can get gusting information as well, but it's giving me the direction, the speed, so that'll generally be in meters per second. The visibility is, I believe, in meters as well, such as it is at its maximum value of 10 kilometers. So you get a lot of information there, and these are our weather conditions that we can see, yep, clouds, it's broken clouds, which works. We have these condition IDs, which the condition IDs, there's the table here of what all of those correspond to. So we can get the written description, but we can also get those numerical values, and you can see percentages that those map to, which is great. So if you wanted to have this then control any aspect you wanted in the game, you've got that information there. It could be down to just simply displaying the data, or it could be down to, you know, doing other stuff where you've got things actually happening in the game based upon these weather effects. But we've got it up and running. We have something where we are able to take our current location. From that current location, we can get the weather information. We also get a bunch of other information in that process of retrieving the details of where we are. Key things that I would really encourage making sure you remember when you're working with this stuff. One of the things is to make sure that you are not sending through requests at too high a rate. Be very cautious with that, because that will get you blocked. There are free plans there generally, but those have limits, so do make sure you're sticking within those limits. When you have something where things require an API key, do not put that API key in a public repo or in anywhere that can be seen in public. Treat that as something that is information you're wanting to keep a bit secure. It's really important. Also make sure with the different ones that you're checking acknowledgements that might be required. So a bunch of the ones may require specific acknowledgements, so make sure you're including that. As I said, I'll list in the description below the ones that I'm using for this, and do make sure you check their terms of how you need to actually credit and acknowledge them. Thanks, folks. Hope you found the video interesting and helpful. If you have, chuck in a like and subscribe. Really helps out. It's really appreciated. If you are looking for the code for the project, that is available up on GitHub, and the link to that's in the description below. If you've got any questions, chuck in a comment. I've also put in a link in the description to the video archive, so set up a searchable archive of all of the videos there that you can be easily tracking down and finding particular ones, and as each new video goes public, that's getting updated in there. And if you're looking for other ways to support the channel, then I do have a Patreon, and there is a link to that in the description below. But until next time, bye!